Have you been diagnosed with nasal polyps? Contact Prism Clinical Research for more information about our nasal polyp study.
It's another tough 2-1 loss tonight for the Minnesota Wild as they fall to the visiting St. Louis Blues. It's time for Wild Breakaway presented by Prism Research. With Wes Walls, I'm Audra Martin. The Minnesota Wild looked like they were picking things up right where they left off Wednesday night with another good effort out of the gate tonight in Game 2 against the St. Louis Blues. Unfortunately, the difference tonight was the fact that St. Louis stepped their game up quite a bit. They came to play this time around, and the Minnesota Wild gave it another good, valiant effort. But again, they come up short. It's a 2-1 loss yet again.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought the St. Louis Blues played a much more structured, much more solid, desperate game from them, without a doubt. You talked about the first period and how the Wild come out of the gates, played outstanding, and I agree with you. I thought they came out flying, and for me, had 4 or 5 unbelievable scoring chances. Maybe 6-7 minutes into the game, and we're not able to get that first goal to get the crowd into the game, and it come back to sting them. So it was a tale of the Wild. I felt probably had more chances than the St. Louis Blues again here in Game 2. Not quite the discrepancy from Game 1, but the Wild were just not able to finish. Devan Dubnyk played good enough for the Minnesota Wild to win, but the Minnesota Wild going into St. Louis for Games 3 and Games 4 are going to have to figure out a way to solve Jake Allen and get a couple behind him.
Yeah, the offense really just MIA the last 2 games for the Wild. Zach Parise, again, the lone goal scorer tonight for the Minnesota Wild. 24 shots on net. Not the plus 26 shot differential we saw just a few nights ago, but still with the edge on shots. And when it comes to the face-off circle, both in favor of the Wild tonight. 1 for 3 on the power play. Another perfect night. 2 for 2 on the penalty kill. The Wild now down 2-0 in this series. Here's what Bruce Boudreau had to say about his team's chances of going on the road and picking up some wins.
Both games were 2-1. If they were 6-0 or something, I'd say it would be, it's going to be a tough task. And not that it's not going to be a tough task, but let's face it, both games could have gone either way. And so I don't see why we can't go in there and do the same thing to them as they did to us. This is what happened last year, and we went into Nashville and won the next 3 games, actually. So, it's not impossible.
So now the Wild will pack their bags and head to St. Louis for Game 3. It's an afternoon of hockey. 1:30 is when we'll get things started with Game 3. Game 4 Wednesday night at 7:30, and 5, 6, and 7 to be determined. We'll see if the Minnesota Wild can turn things around. They have played some good road hockey this season, so that is a promising sign for the Minnesota Wild. Now, again, it's just a matter of getting that offense going. One of the better offensive teams in the league. Can't get it done for some reason here in the postseason. Hopefully that spell ends.
Yeah, for sure. And it would be nice if the Minnesota Wild could score first. Obviously, the St. Louis Blues, the way they're built, the way they're coached, very similar to some of the teams we saw in the early years with the Minnesota Wild before you were here. But where we really packed it in around the front of the net and just tried to keep the puck out of our net and win 2-1 games. Right now, the St. Louis Blues are doing that, and they're have been able to score the first goal in each of the last 2 games, and that's really benefited them. And the Wild have had a difficult time getting inside that area where it's where a lot of the goals are scored in the NHL. So Bruce Boudreau and his coaching staff are going to have to come up with a bit of a game plan to try to see if they can figure out a way to get a few more pucks into those areas.
Yeah, we'll see if the Wild can finally solve Jake Allen, who continues to be very strong for the St. Louis Blues. They'll look to get it done Sunday afternoon in St. Louis. We look forward to seeing it for that game. In the meantime, for Wes Walls, I'm Audra Martin. Thanks for joining us on Wild Breakaway, presented by Prism Research.